Get the fuck out of here!
I like the Predator. Not as much as I like the Alien, of course. The Xenomorph's my favourite one out of the two, if you are... Right, if you're asking, okay, Alien versus Predator, Alien, Freddy versus Jason, Jason. That's just the way I roll. Actually, I roll down a hill when the boys push me down it for being too fat. Anyway, this is Predator Hunting Grounds, and it's not a bad game. I'm just bored of it already. I played it when it first came out. I've been playing it sporadically on and off, and I'm already kind of tired of it. It's a game that's fun for as long as the novelty lasts, and it does have some novelty value. I mean, 4 players versus a Predator player. It's kind of a perfect setting for one of those asymmetrical multiplayer games. It shares a lot of intrinsic DNA with the Friday the 13th game. It follows that same principle. And it does have quite a clever basis for its game. The first Predator movie, of course, featured a lot of shooting in the jungle before the Predator turned up. And Predator Hunting Grounds features a lot of shooting in the jungle before the Predator turns up. It's quite an apt dynamic. You get 4 players who are soldiers with guns, and that plays like a fairly typical first-person shooter. And then you've got the Predator, played in third person, running around in the treetops, doing all of the things that you know. This is one of those games that's designed to make you sit back and say, ah, yes, I remember when old movies. Do you have to get to the chopper to exit the level safely? Damn right you do. Does the Predator have its little pointy laser, and does it go in the trees? That's my perfect Predator impersonation. Yes, it does. It's full of things for you to remember and applaud because you remember it, so that's good. And the game itself, as I say, is a bit dull. I mean, first of all, you've got to look at the human players and ask yourself, if the Predator were removed from this first-person shooter, what kind of first-person shooter would be left? And the answer is a very archaic-feeling, dated, mediocre one. It's fit for purpose and not a lot else. You run around a map shooting at things, usually taking down some sort of drug lord, which I think's a bit unfair. They've got to be lords of something. You face off against really generic enemy soldiers, and all of the objectives consist pretty much of running to one area, holding down a button, running to another area and holding down the same button. Now, the human players can stealth it up. They can smear cold mud on themselves, like in the film, remember, to throw off the Predator's thermal vision. You can sneak about, you can unlock silencers for your weapons. There is a rudimentary stealth system in place for the AI enemies, so that players theoretically don't draw too much attention to themselves and tip off where they are for the Predator. And therein lies the problem, because while you're trying not to alert the Predator, in theory, the game is boring. It's a really, really mundane, bare-bones FPS. The only compelling standout feature is the Predator, and all the tools are in place for a tense game of cat and mouse between the Yautja hunter and the human soldiers. All the tools are there. The Predator, of course, can create that light reflective camouflage and jump from tree branch to tree branch, making leaves fall. It can toss out audio decoys to confuse the players, lay traps, fire nets, shoot the little spinny disc thing. It's got everything it needs to pick off the players silently and terrifyingly, while the players themselves have enough tools to obfuscate themselves and hide and survive the Predator's onslaught. In theory, that's how all this works. In practice, what happens is the Predator jumps down from a branch, hacks and slashes until it knocks everyone over or gets shot to pieces, and that's game. That, in my experience, has been how every game of Predator Hunting Grounds has gone, more or less. There have been attempts at times by one side or the other to try and stick more in character, but whatever side tries that first tends to get fucked by the other side that's simply brute forcing it. That said, don't take my footage of the Predator gameplay as gospel or anything. My footage of the Predator gameplay is shit because I'm shit at being the Predator. However, I am very good at blowing stuff up. So the Predator, of course, when you get downed, you've got the ability to set the old self-destruct mechanism, like in old films, and then you laugh and go The best way for the players to deal with this, of course, is to run out of the blast radius. Or, I guess, stand your ground and hope for the best. And most of them stand their ground. So I've actually team-wiped the enemies in most of my games, in a Pyrrhic fashion, but, you know, I won in the end. The Predator was laughing at the end, so I won that. They did make it feel quite nice to play as the Predator, though. The way it instantly moves and parkours through tree branches, climbing up trunks and jumping around. It's very fluid. Really gives that sense of brutal elegance that the Predator has. There are lots of tools to unlock for the Predator and, well, lots of guns for the humans as well. So there's a lot to play with, all of the stuff from the films. From the bright green blood that allows humans to track you down, to the healing process, which involves a lot of Predator screaming. It's a very authentic experience, clearly developed by people that love the source material. But in an increasingly populated sea of asymmetrical multiplayer games, Predator Hunting Grounds only has the Predator license with which to stand out, and it's just not enough in this case. Like I said, not a terrible game, it's perfectly acceptable, but there's way better than acceptable on the market. And while I played even the not very good Resident Evil Resistance a whole bunch, I got over the Predator Hunting Grounds way quicker, even though technically it's a better game. It's more competently and considerately designed. The gameplay balance is far better. You can actually get into Predator games as a Predator. You've still got to wait like 4 or 5 minutes, but it's better than the hour-plus waiting time in Resistance. And yet, I am more bored by the better Hunting Grounds than the inferior Resistance, for the simple fact that it's just not all that interesting. Even the Predator gets old fairly quickly. All the tools are in place for that aforementioned cat and mouse experience, but the incentive to partake in that just isn't there. And when you couple that with the repetitive objectives that, even when they're different objectives, are still mechanically the exact same objective, you get a game that wears out its welcome pretty quickly. There's a lot of unlocks though if you want, lots of cosmetics. You've got field lockers, which are loot boxes, but I've seen no way to buy microtransactions to get them. They just seem to be part of the leveling and currency, in-game currency system, so that's fine. You know, until further notice, that's perfectly fine. And that's Predator Hunting Grounds all over, really. It's perfectly fine. And aliens are better.